On March the 5th, 1979, at Cardiff Magistrates Court, there ended a brief but extraordinary committal hearing. In just 5 days, the prosecution case alleging fraud and corruption by two prominent local figures had collapsed. Conspiracy charges against a third defendant were dismissed. Aubrey Hames and Lihu Ichilov walked out of the court, ostensibly vindicated after suffering the ignominy, the gossip and the innuendos associated with allegations that dated back to 1975. But their careers had been destroyed. To this day, neither Hames or Ichilov can fully comprehend the reasons behind the charges, which, if proved, would almost certainly have resulted in their imprisonment. Aubrey Hames, a former mayor of Newport, has never been reinstated as assistant docks manager in Cardiff. Lihu Ichilov's once successful company based at Cardiff Docks has gone into liquidation. To understand why the two men were linked in what proved to be an abortive prosecution, it is necessary to examine their background in relation to Cardiff Docks. The rise and fall of Hames and Ichilov is bound up with what was happening at the port. In the early 1960s, trade at Cardiff Docks was at its lowest ever level. Once the premier port in South Wales, principally in the shipment of coal and coal exports, it was now a loss maker to the tune of £500,000 a year. In 1965, Aubrey Hames was appointed assistant docks manager, and it was clear to him and others at the port that survival depended on aggressive promotion. Hames set about the task with vigor.
I think I can claim credit for transforming Cardiff. We revolutionized the charging procedures at the port, simplified the charging, later introduced package deals for importers or ship owners, which attracted new trades to the port, and on a later occasion further increased the attractiveness of the port by introducing a demurrage-free arrangement.
Demurrage is the charge for keeping a ship beyond the time agreed for unloading. Doing away with this charge was one of the incentives that Hames felt should be offered to prospective customers. At this time, too, it was decided that Cardiff Docks should concentrate on a limited number of commodities. Coal exports had disappeared altogether in 1964, and the port had to look for new commodities, including the lucrative citrus trade. Ichilov was then the port representative of the Citrus Marketing Board of Israel. He coordinated the import of Jaffa fruit into this country. Most of the trade was directed into Avonmouth, but occasionally he had to divert a ship into Cardiff. A combination of events, including industrial relations problems at Avonmouth, persuaded Ichilov to transfer the citrus business to Cardiff. Cardiff Docks needed Ichilov's expertise to build up the citrus trade, and Docks Board officials were quick to welcome him and his family to Cardiff. Ichilov's wife had resisted the move, but the welcome that they received dispelled any doubts they may have had.
When we came to Cardiff, we made most welcome by the Docks Board people. In fact, before we moved, one of the offers that was made to me by the Docks Board was that if we'll have it hard or find it difficult to rent or a flat or a house in Cardiff, they will be willing to look in one of their flats in Penarth so that we can have it.
No small measure of the success that followed was due to Ichilov, who personally supervised unloading operations at Cardiff and built up Jaffa imports from around 8,000 tonnes a year in 1967 to a peak of 83,000 tonnes 4 years later. It was a considerable achievement, and the port also managed to attract Outspan. The South Africans were obviously impressed with the success of Jaffa. In 1971, a 3-year deal was struck between the Docks Board, the Citrus Marketing Board and local hauliers. The then Lord Mayor, Mrs. Winifred Mathias, expressed the local authorities' gratitude at a ceremony to mark the event. Ichilov was proud of his achievement. He had worked hard.
I think everybody was proud, especially it took us nearly 4 years to bring Cardiff to the extent that it was, because Cardiff became, for the Citrus Marketing Board of Israel, #1 port in the UK for marketing, distribution, and also the largest port for quantity in Europe.
Aubrey Hames too was enjoying considerable success in his attempt to revitalize the port. and he was combining his work with a hectic local government career. He is now the leader of the Labour-controlled Newport Borough Council. In the early 70s, he felt that he could combine his responsibilities to the Docks Board and fulfill his commitments in local government. At no time did he feel a conflict of interest. He says that he had the backing of his employers, the British Transport Docks Board.
I had tremendous goodwill within the local management of the South Wales ports, and so far as my activities were concerned, I worked a 12-hour day without any difficulty and without experiencing any pressure.
The prospects for Hames then appeared to be good. In 1974, Ichilov decided to leave the Citrus Marketing Board of Israel and, at the instigation of Docks Board officials, set up his own company, Keepak, at Cardiff Docks. Ichilov felt that the time was right to leave his employers.
My contract was terminating at the end of the season, in other words, July 1974, and I could see no reason to continue my employment with the board, and I've left. In fact, at a presentation that was made to me by the Docks Board, shipbrokers, the fruit brokers, and the road haulage, I was presented by Mr. Wareham with this telephone, and in fact, what Mr. Wareham has also stated, there's a picture of the presentation if you wish.
Mr. Wareham then being the Docks manager.
Mr. Wareham was the Docks manager. He went on to say at his speech of that particular presentation that we all know we're losing Lihu, but one door is closed and the other one is open. In fact, he's going to stay with us on his own right with the company that he has got.
The establishment of Keepak as a pre-packing, shipping and road haulage business was not welcomed by everyone. It proved a challenge to establish firms like British Road Services, and according to Ichilov, this is where resentment first began to manifest itself.
From the beginning was totally resented by the British Road Services people. It was also resented to a certain extent by members on the clerical staff within the Docks Board, on the way that I, to them, an outsider, organized a new documentation system. I had to tell them the way I wanted it to be done, and they didn't take it quite the way it should have been taken.
In 1975 came the first suggestion of corruption involving Hames and Ichilov. The rumour circulating in the docks was that Ichilov had paid for Hames and his family to holiday in Israel. In fact, the holiday was paid for by Aubrey Hames, who had used a travel agent recommended by Ichilov. The travel agent was Harold Green of Cardiff. Hames took advantage of a package deal which meant giving an address in Israel. Hames gave Ichilov's mother's address.
Yes, this was part of the deal. It was a form of home holiday, I believe. The price of the trip included the cost of the accommodation in Israel. And one of the conditions of the trip was that one had to give the name and address of someone living in Israel. And I gave Mrs. Ichilov's address.
By doing that, did you secure a reduction in the price?
No, this was it was a special price, but it was available to anybody, any man in the street who wanted to go to Israel on a package deal rather than on the scheduled trips.
Did you pay for that trip, Mr. Hames?
I did, and I still have the check with which I paid for the trip. I did, in fact, indicate to the police, the transport police, when they were interviewing me, that I was always ready to obtain the check and give it to them as evidence that I had paid.
Did they take up that offer?
No, they did not.
I was accused of obtaining a trip, passage actually, to and from Israel to Mr. Aubrey Hames and his family.
Did you at any time pay for Mr. Hames?
Certainly not. I've got Aubrey Hames' check here to prove to you that he had paid himself for his holiday.
This was the check that Mr. Hames paid to the travel agent.
That's correct. In fact, I can also prove to you that on the day that check was paid, I wasn't in this country at all.
Why is it that you hold the copy of a check or a photocopy of a check that Mr. Hames made out?
Well, because since before the committal and after, I have made sure that every relevant document, whether it's relevant to Mr. Hames, it's obviously relevant to me, I would keep with me in a complete file.
You have everything?
Everything.
The cheque used to pay for this holiday was never requisitioned or seen by the British Transport Police, who 2 years later were to accuse Ichilov of paying for the trip. The signature on the cheque is that of Aubrey Hames. It seems that the only document seized upon is the travel agent's invoice with the reference Hames care of Ichilov. The British Transport Police, who are responsible for policing Britain's ports, were later to accuse Hames and Ichilov of corruption. For the first time, the two men were aware of the allegations circulating in the docks.
They were very worrying, and I went to see my immediate superior, the docks manager at the time, told him that I wanted an interview straight away with the port director, and indeed saw the port director that day.
What happened?
He played the matter down, said that there was a lot of gutter politics operating in transport, and suggested that I should forget about it, and unfortunately I did.
I would still react now the same way as I reacted then. I had nothing to hide then. I've got nothing to hide now. I've got all the relevant documents here and another few files to prove that everything that has been said or everything that the police have submitted, we can deny every statement that was given by anybody.
The Transport Police's investigation of Hames and Ichilov coincided with a number of corruption trials involving prominent councillors in South Wales. In 1977, Ernest Westwood, chairman of Mid Glamorgan Planning Committee, was jailed. Other corruption trials also resulted in jail sentences for local authority leaders. It was said that there was a kind of McCarthyism in local government. It was against this background that the Transport Police were carrying out their investigation at Cardiff docks. In August 1977, Hames was enjoying the first few weeks as mayor of Newport. He had been given 12 months paid leave by the Docks Board to take up his mayoral duties. He was unaware that his employers and the Transport Police were about to confront him with news of an internal investigation. Aubrey Hames, the mayor, was summoned by telephone to London. The telephone call led him to believe that he was going there to discuss his promotion. He travelled up thinking that his efforts on behalf of the Docks Board were about to be rewarded.
Or that I was probably going to be considered for the appointment of docks manager Newport in succession to Mr. Smith.
You went up to London believing that?
Yes, I travelled up, rehearsing my speech, trying to anticipate the sort of questions I would be asked and testing my reaction to those possible questions.
What actually happened when you arrived in London?
Well, when I got into the office, I was immediately told that there was an investigation being carried on, a domestic inquiry into certain allegations of some contracts at Cardiff. That the Transport Police were next door, ready to start their investigation, and that I was requested to go and assist them.
It must have been a surprise for you to have been told that, having gone up there under a misapprehension.
I was totally shattered, but nevertheless I had no reservations in the matter. I went to see the police. They were very wide-ranging in their questions, but told me, and repeated it several times, that this was a preliminary investigation, and also said that during the course of the interview and at the very end that I would be seen again by them.
You firmly believe that was an internal investigation. What sort of questions were you asked?
There were wide-ranging questions, some of them rather embarrassing, about my senior officers, about KEPAC, the KEPAC's operation at the docks, and indeed I indicated certain matters, commercial matters, which were confidential, and I would have been devastated had I thought at the time that they would be made public. The ironical thing is that I said one or two things to indicate quite clearly that I discriminated against KEPAC of all companies, and of course Mr. Ichilov is aware of these because he had this information by way of the police doctor.
Was the word corruption, was the word conspiracy ever mentioned?
No, not at all. And throughout the interview, on a number of occasions, and indeed at the very end of the interview, I was told that this was the first of a preliminary investigation and that I would be seen again.
While you were in London, did you appreciate that you really were the subject of that interview?
No, not at all.
Did you appreciate that the transport police were making a recording of that
No.
interview?
No, there was a police constable in the room and he was taking a few shorthand notes, and I was told that he was there for that purpose, but I was unaware that there was a secret microphone installed in the room.
During the course of that interview, or indeed before it, were you cautioned by the transport police?
No, and indeed throughout the interview, on several occasions I was told that this was a preliminary investigation, or the start of investigations, that I would be seen again, and indeed at the very end I was told I would be seen again by the police.
But in fact, this was the only time that
Yes.
you were interviewed.
Yes,
And this interview formed the basis of the charges which were to be brought against you.
completely.
But with hindsight, do you think at that stage you should have protested a little more loudly about what,
Yeah.
what you were being asked?
Well, if you'll excuse the language, I think I was a bloody fool, and my solicitor told me this when I saw him later.
The train journey to the Docks Board headquarters in London was to change Aubrey Hames's life. He says now that if he had appreciated the real reason for the meeting with his employers, he would have had a solicitor present. After that meeting in London, events were to move rapidly, and it soon became clear to Aubrey Hames that he and Lihu Ichilov were the subject of serious charges of conspiracy and corruption. In October 1977, Ichilov contacted the police in an attempt to clear his name.
I was interviewed by the police 3 times, I think twice in November and once in December 1977.
Did you believe that charges would result from those interviews?
Not at any time.
Did you feel then that you had made it quite clear that you were innocent of the allegations that would be made against you?
I think so. I thought so at least, because every question the police asked was answered with supported documents to show them.
In April 1978, the Docks Board suspended Aubrey Hames on full pay because of his alleged involvement with Keepak. In October of the same year, summonses against Aubrey Hames and Lihu Ichilov were served. There is also a summons against Derek Mason, Keepak's operations manager. Mason was never interviewed by the police. Ichilov, recovering from a back operation, is stunned by the news. So is his solicitor.
I was very surprised that the charges were brought. Because as you know, Mr. Ichilov, because there had been rumours, asked me to write to the British Transport Docks Board to tell them that he was willing to cooperate in any way to give them any information they required to dispel those rumours. And then after that, there were 3 tedious days spread over quite a long period of time with Christmas intervening, when prepared questions were put to Mr. Ichilov. I thought he answered them extremely satisfactorily, and I really was very surprised that charges were brought.
Again, in October 1978, the Docks Board tells Hames that there are 9 disciplinary charges listed against him. He is entitled to a full hearing, but is told that it would now be contempt of court to attend. The Docks Board agrees, decides to go ahead with the hearing anyway. The Hames trip to Israel forms the basis of the corruption charge. The 2 men are also charged with conspiracy to defraud the Docks Board of almost £11,000. A cargo of steel coils carried by the vessel the Dorry Forest forms the basis of the second charge. The vessel was due at Cardiff docks in December 1976. Keepak, Ichilov's company, quoted terms to the Docks Board to take almost 5,000 tons of cargo from the ship, store it, and then deliver. The agreement reached was for Keepak to store 4,700 tons of cargo and be paid a sum of about £11,000. The ship began to discharge her cargo, but then, because of a payments dispute between the Docks Board and one of its customers, 800 tons of the cargo is diverted into a Docks Board warehouse. Despite this, Hames, acting on behalf of the Docks Board, confirmed that Keepak would still be paid the full amount as agreed. Hames argues that in this way he was protecting the board's interest by ensuring that the ship was discharged in the scheduled time. Delay would have involved the Docks Board in hefty penalty payments. Hames and Ichilov argue that there was no evidence to suggest fraud. So why were the charges brought? No satisfactory answer has been given. proceedings began on Monday, February the 26th, 1979. On day 2, the conspiracy charge against Derek Mason, Keepak's operations manager, was dismissed, and the stipendiary magistrate, Sir Lincoln Hallinan, said he was beginning to worry whether there was a conspiracy at all. On day 3, the conspiracy to defraud charge against Hames and Ichilov was dropped, and the prosecution substituted deception charges instead. On day 4, the magistrate ruled there was no evidence of corruption. On day 5, the deception charges were thrown out. The prosecution case had collapsed. At the end of the hearing, Sir Lincoln Hallinan had this to say: "I have come to the conclusion that the real issue in this case is an interpretation of a commercial arrangement which primarily would be a matter for a civil court."
I think it was initiated by the Director of Public Prosecutions, and it surprised me because the Director of Prosecutions, the DPP, commonly says that he doesn't initiate proceedings unless he believes that there's a more than 50% chance of success, and I didn't think that proceedings were justified in this case.
The committal proceeding in front of the stipendiary magistrate is merely an opportunity for the defence to establish whether or not there is a prima facie or basic case against him. In this particular case that we are looking at, it was clearly established during the committal proceedings that the case was worthless, and that the stipendiary magistrate threw the case out at this very early stage. The counsel for the defendant, Mr. Hugh Williams, made the following statement: "A civil dispute masquerading as a criminal case." Now that's very unusual. Those are very strong words for a barrister to make in a legal submission, and clearly he impressed the magistrate, who ultimately said that there was no case to answer and it never got any further.
Mr. Hames says that he was only interviewed once by the British Transport Police, but he didn't actually appreciate that he was being interviewed. The word corruption was never mentioned. He thought it was an internal investigation. Shouldn't there be rules governing this sort of thing?
Well, the Transport Police are subject to the judge's rules, which is a code of conduct laid down for the police by the judiciary in terms of the conduct and behaviour, interviewing techniques of suspected persons. I think it's reasonable to assume that Mr. Hames in this case was placed at an unfair disadvantage in that he was totally ignorant of the nature of the investigation and the possible consequences of it. Had it been tested in court, I'm quite sure that defence counsel would have held or would have argued that this case was affected by that type of interview, and that the evidence arrived at from it should be held inadmissible. Of course, it was never tested, but inadmissibility would have meant that that interview could not have been introduced to the court.
A third defendant, Mason, said that he was never interviewed by the police. That seems extraordinary.
It certainly is. This was a very serious charge that he was facing, which would have again produced a prison sentence, and to say that it was extraordinary is to put it mildly. I think probably it's unique. I think the proof of the pudding was in the eating. Sir Lincoln Hallinan at the committal proceedings threw the case out as being worthless, and quite clearly a number of questions remain unanswered.
I believe that it was said during the proceedings that it was a commercial dispute, and I think that that would be a fair description of the matter, a commercial dispute compounded with a lot of trivia.
Did you feel that when you walked out of the court that was the end of the affair, that you had been cleared, you had been vindicated?
Well, I had no doubt in my own mind, but the solicitor did warn me that charges having been slung out in court didn't mean that the police couldn't issue further charges.
Did you wonder at that stage what it had all been about?
I've wondered a lot about this, and don't fully understand why the charges were brought even now.
Mr. Ichilov, what were your feelings when you left the court? Did you feel that you had been vindicated by what had happened?
Well, vindicated, maybe, but let's take the two summonses. The first one of the corruption, we had rumors about it in December 75. Why did we had to wait 2 years for the police to come up with summons on this issue and the issue of the conspiracy? Because on the conspiracy, I did not defraud the Docks Board. In fact, the Docks Board were indebted to Keepak for more than £25,000 at a time.
So you didn't feel you had any charge to answer whatsoever?
None at all.
The British Transport Police were responsible for investigating the Hames-Ichilov case. This is their headquarters in London, and this is as far as we were allowed to go, the front door. Despite repeated requests for an interview, the Deputy Chief Constable said that the matter had been looked into by his predecessor, and he didn't think that anything could be usefully gained by pursuing the matter again. Mr. Hames in particular feels that the matter should be pursued. He questions the way that the Transport Police conducted their one and only interview with him, and he alleges negligence in the way that they carried out their inquiries and presented their case to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Those were allegations that we too wish to put to the Transport Police, but we were not afforded that opportunity. Prior to the committal hearing, the Docks Board had dismissed Aubrey Hames. Despite the fact that he had been cleared in court, the Docks Board refused to reinstate him. In an attempt to get his job back, Hames decided to appeal to an industrial tribunal for unfair dismissal. The tribunal recommended reinstatement. The Docks Board again refused. The tribunal awarded more than £11,000 compensation, then the highest amount paid out by such a body. The tribunal concluded, there can be no doubt in our opinion that in this case there was a serious breach of the principles of natural justice, which require that no one should be condemned before he has had an opportunity of stating his case. Did you think, Mr. Hames, when the Industrial Tribunal had come out in your favour, that that would be the end of the matter, you would return to some sort of normality?
Yes, at first I did think this.
What went wrong? I mean, here you are, a prominent local councillor, and still the tag of corruption stays with you.
I really don't know. It's been a continual fight for the last 3 or 4 years, and it seems to be a fight against the establishment of this country. I've been to the as you say, to the Industrial Tribunal. Following that decision, I went to my Member of Parliament. References have been made to the Minister of Transport. I've been to the DPP, including the Civil Police. I've been to the Ombudsman. And I finally went to the British Transport Police to lodge a complaint against the way in which the police dealt with this case. And nothing has happened.
What effect has it had on you and on your family, this whole affair?
Well, it's obvious that the pressures were great in the earlier part of this case, and emotionally there was a build-up. The 4 children were going through critical stages in their education, but they reacted very well, I thought. But the mark, I think, is there on the family as a whole.
Paul Flynn, a fellow member of Newport Borough Council, was also a member of the local board of the British Transport Docks Board. After Hames's court appearance and the Industrial Tribunal decision, he tried to raise the matter at a local board meeting.
Well, what I was disturbed about on the board was the press reports that I read in which the case presented by the board against an employer had collapsed. And I and a number of other members of the local board were asking for some kind of defense, some kind of explanation why this man should have been treated in this way.
Did you get any explanation?
None whatsoever. We had a long discussion, about 3/4 of an hour on the subject, but the board were content to fall back on the defence that it wasn't our business as the South Wales board, but it was the business of the national board, and they would decide. But they put up no justification, and my view of this is that a monstrous injustice has been perpetrated by the board. They have yet to come up with any public defence of what they've done, and the whole thing seems to be a disgusting situation.
Apart from you raising the matter, did anybody else raise the matter? You talked about injustice. Was that view conveyed to the board, conveyed forcibly?
There was another member, Mr. North, who also supported me on this, and the whole of the debate was one-sided, that there was no defence coming from the other side except to say to us, well, it's not your business, it's not an appropriate thing for us to decide on. They didn't attempt to justify the condemnation that came through clearly and eloquently from the press reports, where their case had collapsed, but still they were going to continue with the injustice of Aubrey Hames' career being destroyed.
Well, I pursued the matter in many ways, and as a matter of fact, I've got a huge batch of correspondence on the subject. For instance, I've taken it up with ministers through letters, and also I've spoken to them personally. I've taken it up with the Docks Board, and on the last occasion, I went to see Sir Humphrey Brown, the then chairman of the British Transport Docks Board, and I was accompanied by the Right Honourable Albert Booth, the present Shadow Secretary of State for Transport was also Secretary of State for Employment in the last Labour government. So he was a man very, very conversant with these sort of issues.
There was a formidable team, but did you get any answers from the Docks Board?
Well, one could almost say that Sir Humphrey Brown almost refused to open the books.
Lihu Ichilov is still paying the price of his court appearance. The one-time successful businessman who boosted trade at Cardiff Docks is now out of work. He has applied for dozens of jobs, but so far he has been unsuccessful. He has had to sell his house, but few of his neighbours realise that he's on Social Security. Ichilov says he's ashamed to tell them. Ichilov's once thriving dockside business has gone into liquidation. At its height, Keepak had a turnover of about £350,000 a year and employed 25 people. Before the committal, Keepak was told by the Docks Board that it was no longer an accredited haulage firm. Ichilov's business depended on Docks Board trade. Lack of business brought bankruptcy and forced Ichilov onto the dole.
Morning.
What sort of experience was that for you, Mr. Ichilov, going into the Social Security?
Very degrading one. I don't wish it on anybody. You feel like a person without any pride. Shameful.
How long have you been claiming Social Security?
About 2 years now.
Did you do so immediately you were out of a job?
No. I've tried to wait a year before I was persuaded to go and sign on, as I'm entitled for it. But I'm still ashamed to go and do it.
It hurts your pride.
Well, I feel I lost my pride and dignity by doing it.
I love to travel, and I used to visit London quite often. Every art exhibition held in the Royal Academy or in the Victoria and Albert, I saw them all, didn't miss any. And I miss this very much. I've lost all my freedom. My children also travelled, and I find this very hard at this time of my life to feel as if there's a wall around this town, and not only I haven't the passes, but I haven't the means by which to travel anyway.
If you ask me, it's affected us morally, mentally, physically, and financially. But, you know, we had to keep going for the sake of the children, you know. So when we've been at home, we try to pretend. But when we went to the office, we discussed everything in the office. And after we went to Mr. Foster that you see, my husband said to me, look, Hannah, I am going to volunteer information. I haven't got nothing to fear whatsoever, and let this atmosphere clear. So I turned to him and I said, look, it's up to you. If that's what you feel, go ahead. And then the police investigated my husband. Every day he came home. Honestly, I could only praying that...
I'm saying every day, but it wasn't only the time of the investigation, it was the preparation to the investigation, in between investigation, and after the investigation.
I was honestly, I was praying that he'll survive it all. He took it so badly, and obviously me as well, because I just couldn't believe that those people that has been so kind, so helpful, with so much compliment, they could have got us involved in such a thing.
In normal circumstances, getting permission to film on Cardiff docks is a formality. But when we told the Docks Board that our filming was in connection with the Hames-Ichilov case, we were refused permission. We also asked for permission to interview Mr. Keith Stewart, the Managing Director of the British Transport Docks Board, or Mr. Ron Berry, the South Wales Ports Director. Our request was not granted. We also understand that senior staff at the Docks Board headquarters behind me have been instructed not to speak to us. To do so could result in disciplinary procedure. The Docks Board then has effectively refused to answer a number of disturbing questions raised by Mr. Ichilov and Mr. Hames.
Why, for example, did the Docks Board proceed with the disciplinary charges? Why did the Director of Public Prosecutions authorize the proceedings the criminal proceedings by the British Transport Police? Why, obviously, why I was not reinstated following the direction from the Industrial Tribunal to that effect? Why I couldn't get through the parliamentary system to get my complaints at least aired, and why the British Transport Police didn't comply with the police complaints procedure as prescribed by law when I lodged my complaint.
Do you think you'll ever get answers to those questions?
I hope so, but my faith in British justice is a little less abiding.
You know, we just couldn't get over this shock. And don't forget that my husband was very, very ill. It affected him so much that he was very, very ill. And by the matter of time, it was minutes that I didn't know if he'll survive it.
Were you
So
tempted to give up sometimes?
No, I wouldn't give up. As long as I know that I can prove that my husband has never been involved in anything wrong whatsoever. And those...
But we continue fighting until justice will be done.
Because it's no good just to run away from situation. You've got to prove that you are innocent. And that's what we are fighting for. I only hope we'll get the strength.